Okay, so picking back up from the last one where we finished the hand, I'm going to move on to doing the head now. I'm just going to make it into one giant set of lips with a bit of a twist. So the first thing I'm going to need to do is to find some lip reference images. So let's go on to Google. You can see I've basically typed in lips, and then I'm going to find the reference images that I think will help me the most for the shape of lip that I want. I'm going to copy the image and then just paste it into a program called PureRef. So PureRef basically allows you to paste any image directly in, and then you can arrange them and you can crop them and things, and order them in a way that's going to assist you with your modeling. It's a free program, and the link to get this program is pureref.com/download.php, and it's completely free. But you do have the option to leave a small donation, which I would certainly encourage because the program is incredibly useful. What I want to do is add the object to get us started on the lips. So I'll probably go with a torus, and I'll rotate that by 90 degrees on the x-axis. I'll move it up a little bit, and then I'm going to isolate it. I'm going to go into front view, orthographic, and I want to shape this now to look like the lips. I've got the lip reference images. I'm going to put this onto a different monitor, and then I'm going to try and sculpt a basic shape. Just apply the scale just in case. Then we'll go into sculpt mode, and I'm going to start moving things around just to get the basic shape of the lip. Let's go into the end panel, into the tool menu, and make sure we turn on symmetry, and then we can start. So let's grab the top, we'll make the brush a bit bigger, and bring that down, and then I'm going to bring this one across. Just worried about getting the basic shape at this point. Alright, so that's the basic shape. Now obviously it's not a very good topology, so we need to get that topology nicely spread out again. So I'm going to Shift R, and then we'll give it a bit more dense topology, and then Control R, and that'll remesh it. And then we can smooth that out a little bit. And then using all the tools that we're now familiar with, I'm just going to reshape it until it looks correct. Let's just check the resolution. It's not too high res at the moment. So what I'm going to do, Shift R again, and we'll make it a bit more high res, maybe about there. And then Control R, apply that. And then you can see we've got a bit more resolution. And from this point, what I'm going to start doing is adding that extra detail. And we use the crease brush. Make sure we reduce the size quite a bit. And we'll just start adding some detail. And we can smooth it off if it's a bit too much. Just going to smooth a few bits out. I'm avoiding using the mesh filter to smooth it because I don't want to smooth too much. Just gives me a bit more control. Make sure I'm only smoothing the bits that that I do want to smooth. And I think the top lip's not quite fat enough, so let me. I'm going to fatten that out a little bit. Let's bring this right up. So that's the basic shape of the lips created, and what I'll do now is start adding a bit more very fine detail. And to do that, I just firstly want to tidy up this model a little bit. So if we look at the topology, it's incredibly messy, and even though it's quite dense, it's still not dense enough for us to do really fine detail. And the best way to do that is to actually use a multi-res modifier. Now, we don't want to use the multi-res modifier on the current topology. Instead, want to remesh it first. So let's come out of sculpt mode, and let's just rename this to lips. What I'm going to do at this point is duplicate this, Shift D. I'm going to call this lips original. Alright, so let's hide lips original. We're going to use that to transfer data back onto the remeshed lips that we're going to remesh now. So again, I'm using the quad remesher. If you don't have it, you can use the remesher in Blender's data panel under the quad, and then quad reflow remesh. So 5000 should be enough, I believe. And we'll choose to remesh. And you can see we've got a much better topology and it's much lighter as well. Now, the only problem is we've lost all that fine detail that we had for those little wrinkles. What I want to do is get the detail from those original lips onto the retopologized lips. So how can we do that? Well, basically, we'll go into the modifier panel with the low resolution lips selected. We're going to add a modifier. And this is going to be the multi-resolution modifier. I'm going to subdivide it. 1, 2. Let's just turn off optimal display so we can see the resolution. I'm going to subdivide it until we've got sufficient resolution to give us lots of nice fine detail. So subdivide again. That's getting pretty good. Maybe one more time. So subdivide that again. We've got 1.5 million faces. We could probably go one more time, but I think this should be sufficient. So how do we get the original detail back onto this model? Very simple, in fact. We go to the modifiers again. We add a shrink wrap modifier. Let me just come out of wireframe. And on the shrink wrap modifier, we're going to hover over the target, press the E key to bring up the eyedropper, and then we're just going to click on the lips original. And you can see that's put all that detail straight back on there. Alright, so now we've got the detail. If I just mute this shrink wrap, you can see that's the effect it's having. It's putting all those nice fine details back on. So I'm going to apply this now by hovering the mouse over this, pressing Ctrl A, and that will apply it. And it's actually embedded the data from the shrink wrap modifier into the multi-res modifier, which is incredibly handy. Alright, so we've got this, and if we look at the resolution, we can see it's very high res. Let's go back in solid mode. And now we can start adding some really fine detail. And to help us add fine detail much easier, we can actually make use of alpha brushes. So we can use the texture basically to draw the bumps onto the model. Instead of trying to hand draw all these tiny little lines, that would take forever and it would probably be rubbish as well. So I'm going to use this one. It's free, by the way, but there's a paid version available as well if you want extra stuff. So back in the model, we've got the multi-res set up and it's still on level 4, so the highest detail. And we need to go into sculpt mode and we need to select the draw brush, the sculpt draw, and then we need to go to the tool and texture, and we need to bring in the textures that we've just downloaded. So I'm going to say a new one, and we'll click on this little button here. This will open up the texture panel over here for us, and then we'll just choose to open. And we can see in here we've got various textures, and if we look on the instructions that were provided with this, we've got 6 textures which are used for different parts of the lip as indicated here. And then we've got a few transitional alphas that we can use in between those. Back in Blender, I'm going to start with the upper middle, and I'll say open that. Now very importantly, we need to set this to negative 0.5, and we need to set the stroke to anchored so that it stays in one place. We can actually see, as we draw that on, we're getting repeating patterns across the lips, which is not what we want. We can fix that by changing the mapping from tiled to area plane. This is already area plane over here, and under advanced, I'm also going to make sure that's on area plane. And now when I draw, it's no longer tiled. We've only got 1. And turn the strength up to maybe 0.5. Let's try that. That's better. I'm going to do the same for the lower lip, so I'll go back into the texture over here and I'll change this to mid-lower. And then we'll just continue doing that with the other textures, so lower left and lower right, upper left, and then upper right. And then we've got the transitional ones, so back in here again. The XR32-bit, and choose one of these. We can just fill in the areas with this. We could probably make these ones a little bit lighter, maybe bring the strength down a bit. What we could even do, if we wanted, we could paint these on now. So let's change it to from anchored for the stroke to space. And maybe just turn it up a bit, maybe it's something like 22%. Make sure we've still got the texture turned on. We can just draw these around the entire model, maybe put a bit on the back as well. Just adding a bit more detail over the existing detail. And if you go a little bit too overboard, then you can always smooth it by holding the shift down while you paint, and that will turn the current brush into a smooth brush. I think I'll add a bit more of those vertical lines around here, and we change the angle, so maybe change it to something like 90. Just add a bit more variation. If we put it on rake, it'll actually follow the brush. Alright, so that'll do. We can always modify it if we want to later. But for now, I think we'll call those lips complete. So now we've got the lips complete, what we can do, we've got a couple of options. We can either keep it as a multi-res modifier so that we work with the full resolution model. So it's quite dense. Now, of course, what we can do is we can turn the level down in the viewport to something like 0. So let's come out of this mode, out of sculpt mode. You see it's very low resolution. So there's not really a necessity, if we're going to stay within Blender, to sort of get rid of this multi-res and use baked normals instead. But if we do want to take it into a game engine, for example, it might be ideal to reduce the number of polygons and use a normal map instead. So I'm going to show you how to do that, just in case that is what you want to do. So let's set up these both back to number 4. Right, so we've got the full detail again. And what I would suggest doing at this point is using, under the shape option, apply base. So what this is going to do, it's going to make the first level, the base level of the multi-res modifier, so if we put this to 0, it's going to make this level take on the shape of whatever you've done in the higher levels up. Now, in my case, it's not necessary because the shape, all the vertices are in the right place. So if I put this back to 4, you'll notice the model itself doesn't actually move. But if yours does, it can cause problems when we come to create a normal map in a moment. So all you've got to do is click on Apply Base, and let me just show you what it's going to do. If I just change, let's go into sculpt mode. I'm just going to make a point of moving this out like this, and then we'll go back into object mode. And now if we go into the first level, so level 0, you can see this part of the lip has now gone back in, and that's going to cause problems. So what we'll need to do is go back to number 4, and we'll just choose Apply Base. So click on that, and now if we go to the first level, 0, you can see the lower resolution versions of the multi-res are now taking on the correct shape, so that when we bake the normals from the high res, it should look correct when we've finished afterwards. So just make sure, if the overall shape of your model is different in the lower resolution versions, that you apply that base. So I'll just undo that. What we'll need to do to get the normal map set up is to bring up a shader editor. And we'll click on these retopoed lips and click New. We'll give it a new material. And what I want to do is create a texture for the normal map to be transferred from the multi-res into. So Shift A, S, Image Texture. I'm going to say I want a new one, and I'm going to call the texture Lip Normals. And I want this to be quite decent resolution, so I'm going to go with 4096. And I'm going to make it a 32-bit float as well. And I'm just going to say OK to that. So that's created us a new texture. If we go into the texture editor, so let's just bring this across, into the image editor, we can now choose this, lips normal, and you'll see it's completely black. So there's nothing in there yet. So how do we create a normal map from this detail that we've got over here? So it's very easy, in fact. What we do, we go to the render panel, And then we scroll down until we get to the bake section. And now with this one selected, we choose bake from multi-res. And what we need to do as well, importantly, is make sure this is set back to 0. So just select those, press 0, then we go back into the render panel, back down to the bake. We want to bake the normals. If you bake it, you can bake a displacement map, but I've found the results are pretty bad. So it's always better to go with normals, I found anyway in my tests. And also make sure you've got the new image texture selected in the shader editor, because that's whatever selected is what will be baked into. Alright, so let's click on bake. Mesh should be unwrapped. So this is basically telling us there are no UVs on this model. Let's go into edit mode. Number 3, and then we're just going to select everything. So press A, and then we'll press U, and that'll bring up the UV mapping window. I'm just going to do a simple one. Rather than draw the seams on manually, I'm just going to choose to Smart UV Project, and this will automatically create a UV map for us. I'll stick with a default of 66 degrees. We could probably put a small island margin in just to be safe, 0.01, and OK. So that's created UVs for us. And if we want to see what the UVs look like, we can go across to the UV editor, and there's the UVs we've got. If they look a bit too far apart, we can probably change this up a little bit. You can see in real time, it's creating those UVs on there for us. We just want to tweak these settings until we get as much sort of coverage in the UV window as we can. That makes sure that we're using all of those pixels that are available for the maximum resolution in the resulting texture. Somewhere about there. And then I'm going to do bake. We'll come out of edit mode first, bake. And it's baking now from the multi-res into this normal map. So let's have a look. It looks pretty good quality. Let's just check now what's going to happen if we go back into here. Let's put it back to 4 so we can see the result. Now we'll turn this off. And then we can start setting up the node tree to use that new texture. We just need to make sure we go into one of the rendered modes. So we'll go into material preview at the top here. Turn the color down to something like pink or red, whatever. Something like that. Shift A, S, normal map. So color to color. And just to be safe, make sure you save the texture by going to the image editor and clicking save. It's going to ask us where we want to save this to. I'll save it in here, lip normals.png, save that. Now usually with a normal texture, you would need to change the color space from sRGB to non-color. So let's try that and see what happens. Now you can see the problem is we've got this very strange result. And the reason for that is because we've saved the texture as 32-bit. There's no need to set it to non-color. So let's set this back to sRGB. And there you can see that works as expected. So if we look at the resolution of the mesh, that's very low poly, which is better for game engines, but it will also improve performance in Blender because we don't need to use that really high resolution mesh anymore. Alright, so I'll keep the multi-res modifier hanging about just in case I decide to use this instead of the normals. We'll see later on. I'm just going to make sure I turn off the little render icon as well. Otherwise we're going to get the mixture of the normals and the actual multi-res join render. So turn that off. We can always turn it back on later. I'll just minimize it to get it out of the way. So it's going to be quite a boring head if it's just a set of lips, I think. So we're going to add a second element. Let's just create a bit more space initially. So we'll click on the lips and we'll do Shift S and move the cursor to selected to make sure the cursor aligns with the origin, which should be in the middle of the mouth. Or if your origin isn't in the middle of the geometry, all you need to do is choose the lips, right click, and then say Set Origin to Geometry. And that'll move the origin to the middle of the geometry's vertices. It doesn't matter if it's perfectly in line because we can always move the new object afterwards anyway. We're just putting this here to give us a good starting location for the new object. I'm going to do Shift A, Mesh, we'll add a UV sphere. And just bring up the redo panel down here and change the segment to something a bit higher, 64, and then we'll probably go with 32. For this part, so we've got a bit more geometry to avoid using a subdivision modifier. Right click, Shade Smooth Auto, or if you're in Blender 4, then you do, instead of going into Shade Smooth Auto, we've now got Shade Smooth by Angle, but we don't want to use that. because that's destructive. If we use this, it will actually only work once in the object's current state. If we then go on to modify the shape of the object, it won't continuously update what should be smooth and what should be a sharp angle. So instead of doing that, we've already covered it in the intro to 3D, but just in case you're a bit rusty, because that was quite a while ago, what we'll do instead is go into the modifiers. So let's just change this back to shade flat. We'll go into the modifiers and we're going to add under normals, smooth by angle, and then turn on ignore sharpness. So click on ignore sharpness, and that's going to do the same thing. And then this will basically allow us to keep modeling, and it's going to change, the result based on what we do on the model. So let me just show you briefly. If I come in here into edit mode, I'll choose this middle vertex, I'll expand it out, I'll go into face mode now, and if I extrude this up, you can see we're getting a sharp edge. Now, if I just turn this off and do right click, shade smooth by angle, and then go into edit mode, you can see it's added those blue edges, which indicates that these have been in edge mode, right click, they've been marked as sharp. So afterwards now, if I make additional amendments to the model, and we'll come back out, you can see we've not got sharp edges here. So it's not updating as we model, which is what we need. And that's why we would use the modifier instead of the right click shade smooth by angle, because this will only work once based on the state of the model at the time that you use it. So always use this one, and then when you finish modeling, you can apply it. And what this will do, let me just turn this on, so you can see that's worked. If I now apply this, Control A, and then go into edit mode, you can see it's now finalized whatever we did by making the edges sharp where necessary. Then we'll rotate it X 90, just so that this part here, instead of pointing upwards, is pointing forward. Then we'll scale it down and move it back so it's inside or behind those lips. And then I want to duplicate this so that we've got an inner and an outer part of the eyeball. So I'm just going to rename it to eyeball. I'm going to put it inside its own little collection, call it eyeball collection. I'm just going to make sure I've applied the scale, so Control A and then apply scale into edit mode. Number 1, to go into vertex mode, I'm going to select the back vertex, and instead of pressing number 3 to select faces and do this, we'll go back into vertex mode, select the middle one again, and press Control 3, and that will select all faces that are connected to the currently selected vertex, or whatever element you had before. So for example, if I had just an edge, or a few edges selected, I did Control 3, it would select all the faces connected to that edge. So do that again, number 1, Control 3, and then we're going to expand the selection with Control plus, all the way around. Let's go around to the front now, until we get the selection in view, covering as much as the object as we want to be the outside part of the eyeball. So probably either there or maybe there. Control minus will deselect, Control plus will expand, etc. So I'm probably going to go with maybe one more, and then I'm going to do Shift D to duplicate this, right click so that it snaps back into its original location, P, selection, and that will separate it. You can see now we've got another eyeball over here. I'm going to call this eyeball outer. Come out of edit mode, go into solid view, click on the outside one, and we'll add a solidify modifier, change the offset to 0, and we'll just expand this a bit now, somewhere about there. And I will also add a bevel modifier. And then we'll control the size of this bevel with the amount here, and then number of segments, maybe give it 4. And you can see that's the effect that that's had. And of course in Blender 4, you're going to have to move that smooth by angle modifier to the bottom of the stack so that it's calculated after the other two modifiers. And if you're getting strange results, just make sure that you've applied the scale on both of the eyeball objects. I want to give it a material, so let's just drag up a shader editor. and I want to go into material preview mode so I can see what I'm doing. I'm going to click on the outside eyeball. I'm going to give it the material I've used for the rest of the robot's body, the shiny or the glossy white material. And then for the inside, I want to create two materials. So I'm going to go into the shader properties over here. I'm going to say new material. And this one I'm going to give the metal material that I've used previously on the robot's shoulders. And I'm going to add a new one by clicking plus, go into edit mode, number 1, select this vertex, Control 3, and then Control plus to get a pupil area. Probably maybe there. And then I'm going to assign it this material, and then we'll give it a new material. And I want this to be sort of a Terminator look, so we'll go down to a reddish colour. I'll hover my mouse over the base colour and I'll press Ctrl C. That will copy the colour, and then if I go down to the emission, I can do Ctrl V, and then it'll paste that in. So we can probably add a little bit more interest. We'll go back into edit mode if you're not already in it. Ctrl 3, Ctrl plus, E, we'll extrude it in. And then number 2, we'll select this one, Ctrl B, and we'll add a bit of a edge on there. However you want it to look, either smooth, or if you use your mouse wheel, you can change the number of segments. I'm probably going to go with maybe that sort of a look. And if you want to add a little bit more interest, then you can maybe you can go into face mode, Alt click on these edges here, and we can do the same, extrude those in, and then we can probably, number 2, select this one. Let's go into isolation mode so we can see what we're doing. So I'm going to select that edge, that loop of edges, this one, and this one. Control B. And then you can see we're doing a similar thing there as well. That's giving it a bit more interest. And you can do that around the entire model if you want. So maybe number 3, we can do it here. Let's go into front view, number 5. Let's try and get it so we've got a cross. So they're all in the correct place. And we can do the same we did before. We'll do, this time, instead of doing E, if we do E, it's going to go like that. Do that again. So just turn off proportional editing. If you do E, it's going to go in one direction. We want it to go inward, so we'll do Alt-E and choose extrude along normals. And then we can do something like that, or like this. Now I've gone a bit farther. I don't actually want to go into the middle there, I don't think. So I'm going to undo that. I just want to deselect those middle parts. So I'm going to do C. I'm going to change the size of this selection. And I'm going to, when I've got it over the bits I want, I'm going to press middle mouse wheel down, and that will deselect them. Although unfortunately, it's not quite worked on these bits here. So escape, and we'll go in, and we'll need to shift click on these. Or we could go into wireframe, Z, toggle X-ray so we can see all the way through. And we just want to make sure we can deselect just these parts here. It's quite frustrating that you've got to press escape every time you want to move the viewport. But there you go. Alright, so back out of there. What we can do now is Alt-E, extrude along normal, and we can either bring them out or we can take them in, whichever you think looks best. I'm going to bring them in because obviously we've got that outer part of the eyeball, which these would be clashing with. But we could actually maybe bring it out, having said that. And then, if we come back out of isolation mode, out of edit mode, let's select all this, back into isolation mode again. What we could do is expand this outwards a bit just by scaling. Until we've got that over the top of there. That might add a nice bit of interest, in fact. Yeah, I think that's pretty good. So let's go back into material preview. Well, that's quite an interesting looking eyeball. Yeah, I quite like that. We can always add more to it later. So let's come back out of isolation mode. And I've noticed as well that all this top part is pointing to the back instead of to the front. So I want to rotate these around. Let's select all this. We'll do. Now, don't forget, at this point, make sure you've finished with the originals. So the original lips. If you haven't, just unhide them as well. And make sure you include those in the selection. And then we'll do RZ 180, spin it around. And we'll just get it into place. I think this is leaning back a bit too far there, maybe. Let's just move these, rotate these around. Better here, probably bring it forward a bit. And then we'll do the same. Bring these forwards. And we'll hide those original lips again. And let's just put these in their own container. And then we'll take these parts, put these in a container as well. Call this body. And then these parts here, these are the original meshes, which I'm not really bothered about now. So I'm going to delete these. So when we come to doing the actual skeleton, we're going to add a bit more interest to the head part, sort of having wires and things all over the place. But we'll come to that later, just to finish that off. And we'll probably make these lips, I don't know, maybe pneumatically controlled inflatable rubber that also double as the eyelids. So in the next video, I'm going to move on to the feet, and then we'll do the fun part, which is creating a really nice looking skeleton to control with inverse kinematics, and then we can breathe some life into the character by making it dance around or something like that.